We're learning the Sikha on Parshas Masei in Chelek Chavches on page 219. The shir today is being learned Lila Nishmas, Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rab Menashe Koltman. Es ist Yedua, was es steht in Shlah benegea de Parshias, Matis und Masei und Dvarim. The Shlah says regarding the three Parshias of Matis, Masei and Dvarim as Tamid Cholim ben Amtzarim ki Udava Bitai. They always fall out in the time called Bein HaMetzarim. Those are the 3 weeks from Shavasa B'Tammuz until Tisha B'Av, because it's connected to this time. Und is dort mevayer baruch di shaykhis von dem Teichen HaParshias zu Bein HaMetzarim. And he explains at length the connection of the content of these Parshias to this time period, the time of the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. Now, Al Pi HaMavur Kama Pamim, based on what was explained many times, B'negei dem Zman from Bein HaMetzarim, regarding this time period, as dafke in die tag darf der achakeloi b'chol yom shel yavei zayin be'izchaskas yeseda. That it's specifically in this time period when the hope and the waiting for the coming of Mashiach has to be even stronger. First of all, is that in die tag mesugel b'yaisit some limbud from Masechta Midas and Hilchas Beis HaBechira. It's for this reason that in this time period it's especially the right time to learn about the Beis HaMikdash in both Masechta Midas and in the Rambam, in Hilchas Beis HaBechira. Hayais, as durch dem Limud ve'esek, in Tzuras Habayis, Utchonasai, Moitzav, Muvav, Chol Tzureisav, is Kol Chol Kaisav, because when one learns about the form or the structure or the plan or the layout and all the details of the Beis HaMikdash is, so then, as the Medrash says, Ani Maila Aleim Ki Ilu Hem Oiskim Bebinyan Habayis. Hashem says, I consider it as if they are occupied in the building of the Beis HaMikdash. So this is something which is especially necessary in this time of the 3 weeks to learn about the Beis HaMikdash. It's verstandig, so it's understood, as in the Parshias, Matis, Masei und Dvarim is merum is nit nor the Avelus mitzad Churban Habayis Chulu, that in these 3 Parshias, it's not only that we have hinted in them about the mourning for the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash, as the Shalah explains, but oich der Inyan HaGola. Also, there is hinted here about redemption, or befrat b'shaychus zu binyan habayis, and especially in connection to the structure of building the Beis HaMikdash. So therefore, in connection to this, is da a bir von Taten bekesher mit dem Pasuk der Parshaseinu bei Ore Miklad v'yeshev ba, or v'yoshav ba ad mois hakoyen hagadol. The Rebbe's father has an explanation on the Pasuk in Parshas Masei where it speaks about the halacha that one that killed someone b'shegig, that is exiled into this city of refuge, remains there until the Kohen Gadol passes away. V'sloitem kumtu atayis bir in halacha hashayeches zu bin abayis k'dlekamon sivdal veilech. And according to this explanation of the Rebbe's father, this will give an added explanation regarding a certain halacha in the building or in the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, as will be explained from Sivdalid and further. Okay, so to begin this, the Rebbe starts with a halacha in the Rambam in Hilchas Beis HaBechira. In ersten Perek von Hilchas Beis HaBechira paskent the Rambam. In the first chapter of Hilchas Beis HaBechira, the Rambam says as follows: Ve'ein boinim boi in heichel va'azare eitz boiled klal. You're not allowed to build, whether in the heichel, the actual structure of the Beis HaMikdash, or the azara, the courtyard, anything that would have a piece of wood that sticks out in it. It's built with stone, bricks, and lime. Frektor of the Ravid, so the Ravid asks, and this halacha of the Rambam, the room that was designated for the Kohen Gadol to be there, as we'll see later, this was the place where the Kohen Gadol spent the 7 days when he was separated to prepare for his Aveda, his service that was done in the Beis HaMikdash and Yom Kippur. That room of the Kohen Gadol was built from wood. Und wie die Mishnah sagt in Masechta Midas, as the Mishnah says this clearly, as eine von the Lishkas sheba Azare is given Lishkas ha'etz. One of the chambers in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash was called the wooden chamber. For sie is given Lishkas Kohen Gadol. And this is the chamber where the Kohen Gadol spent that time. So how could it be built from wood if the Rambam says that you may not build in the Beis HaMikdash anything from wood, not only in the Beis HaMikdash itself, but in the courtyard as well? As in Mefaran Mefarshim was learned, there are commentaries that explain as Lishka Sa'etz meint nit as die Lishka is gemacht geworden von Eitzim. The fact that it was referred to as the wooden chamber, it doesn't mean that it was built from wood, nor as Yeved blois angerufen mit dem Namen, had this title of being the wooden chamber, so the verschiedene Timim was given of them, for various reasons that they explain why it got this title. Es ist a beschwer anzunehmen atem pirish. However, it's difficult to accept this answer, weil because Neisif of the Lefi Ani is daitin in Glattkeit von die Timim, weil ich sagen of them was the Lishkas kein Gadol wird gerufen Lishkas Ha'etz wen kam keimai. In addition to the fact that the various different reasons that they give for why they had this title of being called the wooden chamber, that they are not good reasons, and it's not the place here to go into all their reasons and to explain why they are not good explanations, is Lishkas Ha'etz bepashtus meint as die Lishka is gemacht geworden von Eitz. The title that it was a wooden chamber simply means that this is a chamber that was built from wood. So how do we answer the question of the Ravid on the Rambam? So to answer this we can say, as the Rambam Gufe hat es bewarnt. The Rambam himself added a word in the halacha that clarifies what the answer is. B'diuk l'shoinai, the exact words of the Rambam is, V'eim beinum by eitz boilet klal, that you may not build wood that protrudes or sticks out in the Beis HaMikdash. And as the commentaries explain, as if an etzem arayim boyin an eitz in binyan is netak kinisse, that just building and inside, if there is wood that's built in, that itself is not what's forbidden. The isser is narv and the eitz is boilet v'niker. The problem is if there's wood that sticks out and is noticeable. On the Makuf from Rambam is the source for the fact that the Rambam says that the Isser is only when it is noticeable. From the Sechta Rosh Hashanah. It's from what it says in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, where es bringt sich the Pasuk, as Shlomo Melech hat gebayt. There it speaks about this, that Shlomo Melech built the Chotzer HaPnimis, the inner courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, which is Ezra's Kainim and Ezra's Yisrael. That's the area that was designated for the Kainim to do their Aveda there. And another area in front of that where the Yisraelim can enter into. So the Gemara says that he built this Chatzer Pnimis, Shloisha Ture Gazes, V'tur Kreises Harazim. 3 rows of gazes, which is chiseled out stones, and 1 row of cedar wood. And the Gemara sagt darauf, and the Gemara explains that Shleime Shake Bibinyana, that the wood was included inside, it was not sticking out, it was a place that was built inside. Unsadye Besida, it was covered with lime. And therefore there was no piece of wood that was protruding, it was all covered by the stone that was built over it. And that's the source of what the Rambam says, that he adds the word bailet, that only if there's wood that's noticeable is it not allowed. So therefore we could simply say, as die Lishka Sa'etz is Take gemacht geworden von Eitz, that this chamber, this wooden chamber was built from wood, und von deswegen is the Beinet gewinnt kishum Isser. However, there was nothing that was forbidden about this, weil man hat im Eitz mashkia gewinnt und verdeckt mit Sid v'chulu, because the wood was built in and covered with lime, as es soll sein kein Eitz beilet. So there was no wood that was protruding that would be a problem. That's the Pshat in the Rambam, and this is how this chamber of the Kohen Gadol was built. Es bleibt aber nicht verstandig. However, what remains to be explained here is, das ist bloß a tam maspik favos man hat gemerkt bloin a lishka von Eitzim. This is a sufficient explanation for why it was allowed to build this chamber made from wood. And therefore, however, what still remains to be explained is, why was it in the first place that they had to build this chamber from wood? Und danach verdecken die Eitzim mit Sid, and then to cover it with lime. Und nicht nur von Avonim oder Levenim wie die andere Lishkes, and not to build it as most and every of the structure of the Beis HaMikdash, including the chambers that were built from either stone or brick. The Taisis Yantiv is mevai the tam deruf. So the Taisis Yantiv says the reason why this chamber was built differently with wood, as das is al derech wie the Gemara is masber. This is similar to the idea that the Gemara explains. Was die Lishkais sind gewesen ausgestellt an Eifen, was hat Geirem gewesen, a Tirche Yesere, wa avoides kein Gadol bei Yom HaKippurim. Gehen a hin und zurück mit Darum letzafon und mit Zafon ledarum. The location of the chambers that were used by the Kohen Gadol was built in such a location that it caused him extra tircha and extra. He had to walk from south to north and north to south in order to get to the locations that he needed to. Why was it built this way? And not closer in proximity to make it easier for him. So the Gemara says the reason is Kedei Shalei Tuzuach Daiti Alav Azal Zechnit Mizgoy Zayin Bekesa Kohuna. That since the Kohen Gadol is elevated to such a great status, he has the crown of being the Kohen Gadol, so in order that he shouldn't take pride of this and it shouldn't have any feeling of haughtiness, so they built it in this way that he should be forced to work and to walk back and forth and take to heart that he's here to work for Hashem's sake. So about Derech Zeh, so the Taisus Yom Tov says, similar could be said, Binyaneinu. In our case, the fact that the chamber of the Kohen Gadol is built differently, it's not built properly with stone or brick, but with wood, Kedei Shalei Tuzuach Daiti Alav is ein Lishke nit von Avonim nor von Eitz. For the same reason, his chamber is not built from stone, but from wood. That's the Taisus Yom Tov's explanations. Aber l'chayre is es nit can be a maspik, but it would seem that this explanation is not sufficient. Yes, it is true, as the Gemara says, that it's necessary to be sure that the Kohen Gadol will not be a Balgaiva with his position that he has. However, it's still not logical to say that we add too much to this. As mazomahad design in them, that we should go overboard with this. They could even get to the point that there's a suspicion that this Kohen Gadol doesn't have the proper feeling in what he's doing here. Al derech, wie the Mishnah sagt, and this is similar to what we find that the Mishnah itself says, as b'shastin is mashbiyah dem Kohen Gadol, as on the b'shani zayin say that Avodah Sayem, they would have the Kohen Gadol take an oath before he would do his work on Yom Kippur, that he will not change from the order of the way Chazal established that the work should be done. They would separate from him and cry for the very fact that they suspected him and they had to have him take this oath. So we see here that we don't want to go overboard with doing something that shows that we suspect the Kohen Gadol of not being on the proper level. Befrat, and especially as Neisif, was mevavarent dem Leute zuach daite alav durch Verschaffen a Tirche Rabbe bavidosai. It's already accomplished that he shouldn't have this kind of feeling of haughtiness by this, that he has to work extra hard in his Aveda. Und Neisif was euch die Perische sein Yom peilt, wie Rashi sagt, as lo yehei liboy zocha alav. The very fact that he's separated from his family and from his home for 7 days, that also brings him to realize that he's doing a very important and special work here, and he shouldn't take it in the wrong way, take credit for it for himself. Soll man noch meiser sein in dem, durch Mishane sein, ulechol yemei hashana, bauen die Lishke as Kohen Gadol von Eitzem? Is it necessary to change the very structure and the construction of this chamber, and not just for the days that the Kohen Gadol is there, but for all days of the year, and to build it from wood for this reason? It doesn't seem that this reason justifies changing the structure of this chamber, that it should be built from wood. So the Tate in Zayna Ores of Masechta Midas sagt, the Rebbe's father, in his commentary on Masechta Midas, writes that Lishkas Kohen Gadol Nikras Lishkas Ha'etz Nor Kol Zman Sha'Kohenim Agdolim Hoyuksherim V'Tzadikim She'erichu Yomim K'moi Shimon HaTzadik. This chamber of the Kohen Gadol was referred to with this title as the wooden chamber that was only as long as the Kohenim Gedolim that served in the Beis HaMikdash were proper, they were tzaddikim, and they lived a long life, like we find by Shimon HaTzadik. Abenit noch Shimon HaTzadik. But after Shimon HaTzadik, which was a while into the building of the second Beis HaMikdash, wenn man hat gebitten dem Namen von Lishkas Kohen Gadol auf Lishkas Parhedrin. At that point, they changed the name of this chamber. It wasn't referred to as Lishkas Kohen Gadol or Lishkas Ha'etz, but it was referred to as Lishkas Parhedrin. What's the meaning of the word Parhedrin? So while, as the Gemara there says, Neisnin olav mamen lekuhuna, because at that point the Kohenim Gedolim were not necessarily tzaddikim, rather they paid their way into becoming a Kohen Gadol. And once a year they had to appoint a new Kohen Gadol, because when this Kohen Gadol that was not a tzaddik entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he did not come out alive. And he would be changed every year, like a parhedrin, which is some kind of appointed government official, or someone in some level of authority that is being changed every so often. So therefore they named this lishka with this term parhedrin, to signify this point here about the Kohanim at that time, or the Kohanim Gedolim at that time, that were changed once in 12 months. And each Kohen Gadol came and built the structure again for himself to establish this place that he's a new Kohen Gadol for himself. So it got this new title of Lishkas Parhedrin. And the Rebbe's father goes on to explain, as eitz, the significance of this, that it's built from wood and it's called Lishkas Eitz, Meire al Arichas Yomim. It's because eitz shows on long life. Like the days of wood is the days of my people. Und das ist der Tam, was in dem Zman, wenn die Kohanim Gedolim seine Gewenk Scheirim, hat man es angerufen Lishkas Eitz. So this is the reason why, in the time when the Kohanim were on a proper level, it's referred to as Lishkas Eitz. Tzaliv zer arichas yamim. Shezeu askaras tzidkasam. It's because of the fact that they lived a long life, which reminds us that they were tzaddikim. Und danach is the Tate Meisif. And then the Rebbe's father adds another point. The Kohen Gadol shayich la'arichas yamim. The Kohen Gadol has a connection to long life. La'arichas yamim nemt sich fun yemin. A long life, is the source of it is coming from the right side. Oirech yamim bimina, as the pasuk in Mishlei says, that long life is on the right side, which is b'chinas chesed, kindness. Was Kohen Gadol hu b'chinas chesed. A Kohen Gadol represents kindness. Und bringt a raya lezeh, and he brings an additional proof of this, as in Yonei from Kohen Gadol is arichas yamim, that the whole inyan of a Kohen Gadol is long life. From the Maimer Azal, from this that it says in the Medrash regarding this, what it says in this week's parasha, b'nigeya al heirig nefesh b'shgaga, when one kills someone by an accident, was the din is as must bleiben be'ir miklotay ad mei sakayin agadol. So he has to be exiled to a ir miklat, to a city of refuge, and he has to remain there until the Kohen Gadol passes away. So the Rebbe's father says, Reitzeach mekatze yom of shalodam. This murderer brought the person's life to end early. He shortens the person's life. The Kohen Gadol mairich yom of shalodam, and the Kohen Gadol is the one that lengthens a person's life. So therefore, ein bedin. This is, I believe, the lashon of the Gemara actually, or the lashon of the Sifri. Ein bedin sheyehei mi shemekatzer yom of shalodam lefnei mi shemairich yom of shalodam. So therefore, it's not right that the one that shortens someone's life should be released from his place where he's exiled before the one that lengthens life passes away. And therefore, he remains there until the Kohen Gadol passes away. Here is the point that the Rebbe's father says. Now, Yeshleimar, it could be explained as the Yisafeh V'Rayeh, this added point that he says at the end and the proof that he brings, as this is in Yonish al Kohen Gadol, that this is what the Kohen Gadol is about. Mairich Yom Shalodam. He brings long life to a person. Is Oicha Yisafeh in Bavaran in the Shaila Anal, Favas, the Lishkas Kohen Gadol is given Gebeit von Eitzim Davke. It's adding a point in clarifying and explaining why this chamber that the Kohen Gadol is in is built from wood specifically. Das kommt nicht nur zu Merame sein mit dem Namen Eitz wegen der Arichas Yomim Bepoil von die Kohanim Gedolim Shoyet Tzadikim. Because the point here is, it's not only a hint for the fact that there was a time period when the Kohen Gadol were Tzadikim, and therefore they actually lived a long life. Not so madgish sein, however, it's more. It's coming to highlight, as das is in Yonai Shel Kohen Gadol B'chol Azmanim, that long life is actually something that this is what the Kohen Gadol is about in all time periods. B'li untershed, see the Kohen Gadol is b'poil marich yamim or not. Regardless of whether this is a Kohen Gadol that's actually living a long life or not, but a Kohen Gadol, his entire inyan is to bring long life. Punkt wie der din von v'yashav ba'ad meis Kohen Gadol is b'chol azmanim. Just like this halacha, that the one that's in the ir miklat remains there until the Kohen Gadol passes away, and that's a halacha that applies in all times. Eich when the Kohen Gadol hat nit marich yamim given, even in a time when the Kohen Gadol didn't actually live a long life. Und the far is Lishkas Kohen Gadol gemacht geworden von Eitzim Davke, and therefore this is the explanation why the chamber of the Kohen Gadol was built from wood, because wood is something that represents long life, which is what the Kohen Gadol stands for. The Kohen Gadol is Chesed, which is long life, as we see that this halacha applies regarding the Kohen Gadol in all times, regardless of whether the Kohen Gadol was actually Mairich Yomim or not. So this is the explanation that the Rebbe's father says regarding the Lishkas Ha'etz and the connection specifically to the Kohen Gadol. But there's still is something that's required to explain here, at least on a deeper level, to see something positive and on a deeper level about this Lishkas Ha'etz and what it represents. V'balt as inyan ha'etz is verbunden mit Kohen Gadol, arichas yomim. Since the wood is connected to the Kohen Gadol and his long life, is wie kommt es, as man darf die Eitzen verdecken mit Sid, as es soll nicht sein beilet. So then why is it that the wood that it's being built with has to be covered with lime, that it should not be protruding? Now, emes takes that din is as ein beinem by eitz beilet klal. Yes, this is because of the halacha, that in the Beis HaMikdash, there may not be any wood that's protruding. Aber jede Prat in Mikdash is doch betachlis adiuk und is masse mit dem Teichen Einyan. Everything and every detail that's built in the Beis HaMikdash is precise and is fitting according to the content of what that space that's being built is. Darf man lechein sagen, therefore we must say, as das was the Eitzen darf sein mechusse besid, the fact that the chamber built from wood had to be covered with lime is weil azay fadet sich mit zat Teichen Einyan. The fact that it's covered is also expressing something about the content of this chamber. As Afalpi, as in Yonishlan Kohen Gadol, is Arichas Yomim, that although the Kohen Gadol stands for a long life, and that's why it's Lishkas Ha'etz, verdeckt. But there's something about the Kohen Gadol that requires that it should be covered with lime. So this needs to be explained. Bis dem Zman noch Shemoneh Tzadik, wenn die Kohenim Gedolim haben nicht Meirich Yomim gewähnt. It's understood in that time period after Shemoneh Tzadik, when the Kohenim Gedolim did not live long, his Movam was the Eitzim Zane Gewähnt verdeckt. So we understand what the symbolism is by the fact that the wood is covered. V'balt as the Inyan Arichas Yom Shel HaKohen Gadol is Damod Gewähnt verdeckt. Since what a Kohen Gadol is about, that his long life, but that was not revealed, it was covered at that time, the Helim, was the fact that Shem nit gerufen die Lishkas Kohen Gadol mit dem Namen Lishkas Ha'etz Kanal, and therefore it didn't anymore have this title. It wasn't referred to as Lishkas Ha'etz, but Lishkas Parhedrin. But the question is, was haben die Eitzim gedacht sein mechusse euch kol zman sha'kohenim gedolim hoyu ksherim u'tzadikim v'sharichu yomim? Why was it built and always covered, including in the time when the Kohenim Gedolim were appropriate and were tzadikim and they lived long life? Or befrat as dafke di yarim zene shonim kitikunam, when the Kohen Gadol is masen l'mashanema vayavdel arin kodesh hakadoshim. In this time period, the years when things were the way they should be, and the Kohen Gadol was on the level of the pasuk where it says that he's separated to be on the level of kodesh hakadoshim. So why is the wood that represents that positive character of the Kohen Gadol, the Inyan of Arichas Yomim, why is it being covered? Das verstehen, so to understand this, the Hagdim, Abir, let's first explain. The Maim Chazal mentioned before that the Gemara says, as noch Shemoneh Tzadik hat man den Namen von Lishkas Kohen Gadol verbitten of Lishkas Parhedrin. That after the time period of Shemoneh Tzadik, the name of this chamber was changed to Lishkas Parhedrin. Because of the fact that the Kohenim Gedolim were changed every year, like Parhedrin, like a government official that is replaced every so often. So regarding this Gemara is nidglatik. It's not fully understood here. Even after the time period of Shemoneh Tzadik, seine gewähnt kame Kohenim Gedolim, was seine gewähnt Tzadikim, und haben Meirich Yom gewähnt, akapanem mer v'yud beis chaydish. There were other Kohenim Gedolim that were great tzaddikim that did live a life at least longer than 12 months, as the Rabbi brings in the footnote, the source for this. So favazamen rufen di Kohenim Gedolim mit azan nomen Lishkas Parhedrin. So why this name, Lishkas Parhedrin, from that time period, that would apply also to these Kohenim Gedolim as well, was is madgish di rishus von andere Kohenim Gedolim, was hat Gerim given as Machlif und Eisa Kol Yud Beis Chaydish. That highlights the wickedness of the other Kohenim Gedolim that caused that they should be changed once in 12 months. But this is a name that's being given to this chamber in a time period where there were certain Kohenim Gedolim that were tzaddikim. It would seem that this name of Lishkas Parhedrin, why it was given at that time, could be explained as follows. Based on a point that was explained a number of times, the fact that the Kohen Gadol was changed once in 12 months, weist auf a Meile by the Kohenim Gedolim. that it actually expresses something great about these Kohanim Gedolim in that time period. As trotzdem, was sie haben gesehen, wie die friedige Kohanim Gedolim haben nicht mit sich nasse gewesen. That although they saw themselves what happened with a Kohen Gadol that's not a tzaddik, and that enters into the Kohen Gadol, and he didn't come out alive, afal pikein haben sie sich mishtadel gewesen und gegeben Mammon, oi werden a Kohen Gadol. Yet, this didn't stop them from making every effort and even paying money to be appointed as a Kohen Gadol. Seemingly it's very difficult to understand. Wissen die Madrege Satzmai, if the person is well aware of what level he's on, as is not royal Kohen Gedoyle, that he as well is not fit to be a Kohen Gadol, was the fact that he must kaufen the Kohen Gedoyle bedamim, and therefore the only way he'll be appointed to a Kohen Gadol is by paying his way into it. Hat doch gewusst, as wird mit sich nasse sein. So he must have known that if he'll be appointed as a Kohen Gadol, he's not going to survive his entrance into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Is wie kommt es, as soll haben a sehr starken Rotten zu werden a Kohen Gadol? So how is it that he still had such a strong desire to be a Kohen Gadol? Now the beer bezeh is, so as explained, the explanation here is that we can see about these Kohanim Gedolim, their chayfetz u'tshuke, areinzugehen in Kodesh HaKadoshim b'yom HaKippurim, their desire to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur, wo the Shechina is sheire ba'ofen goloi, where the Shechina dwells in a revealed manner, is by ze given as ze grace was so powerful as is by ze given kedai as a fila as a vetzelibdem that makes sich nasi sein. They were ready to be appointed just to have that opportunity to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, even if he won't come out alive. So we see that there's something very positive and very great about this desire that they had to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Und der Fall hat gerufen the Lishkas Kohen Gadol, Lishkas Parhedrin. So based on this, we could say that this is why this chamber was referred to as Lishkas Parhedrin. Euchen im Zman from Kohanim Gedolim Kshedim with Tzadikim, even in a time period after Shimon HaTzadik, where there were certain Kohanim that were Tzadikim. The mit hat ein gewollt madgish sein dem Goydel die Teiligkeit von Areingehen in Kodesh HaKadoshim. What's being highlighted here is there's something that's very great about this. How special and how valued it was to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Afile ein und einzig mal, even just one time in a person's lifetime, afile when this is verbunden mit that itself and hepach hachaim. And even if the outcome would be the opposite of life. Und das ist me'oirer, at shukim yuchedes areinzugehen in Kodesh HaKadoshim, euch bei a Kohen Gadol kosher v'tzadik. So this awakens a unique desire to enter into the Kodesh HaKadoshim by a Kohen Gadol that is appropriate and is a tzaddik, was the Shanarai kam upon him in Kodesh HaKadoshim that may have entered already a number of times, as jede Knisse soll bei ihm sein, Teier Punkt, wie wollte rein, bloß dem einmal. That every time he enters, that it should be very special to him, as if this is the only time that he's entering into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's the significance of this name, and therefore there's something very positive that is expressed in this name of Lishkas Parhedrin. Aber l'chayre is das nit abir maspik. But it would seem that this is not a sufficient explanation for what is the positive aspect with this name of Lishkas Parhedrin. Sof, the mant, the nomen, the anhoge biltiritzuye from the Kohanim Gedolim. Because in the end of the day, the name Lishkas Parhedrin, referring to the fact that they were exchanged constantly, shows on the inappropriate behavior of the Kohanim Gedolim, which is a name that's being given in a time period where there were Kohanim Gedolim that were tzadikim. Ubechlal, was für an Ort hat zu Keveya sein, Hashem, was es ma'ire begole, hepich schusam shal Yisrael. In general, the question here is, even if this is a fact that there was a time period where the Kohanim Gedolim were not tzadikim, and they were changed every once a year, but why establish this as a name for a chamber in the Beis HaMikdash to constantly remember something which is the opposite of a merit for Yidden? Noch furthermore, the Lishkas Kohen Gadol is given be'ikke, bestimmt for the Shivas Yamin, wenn man mafresh given the Kohen Gadol. What was this Lishka used for? It was a chamber, as mentioned, that the Kohen Gadol primarily, this was the place that for those 7 days, that he had to be separated from his home to prepare, to be elevated for the Aveda of Yom Kippur, Aprisha v'aliyah legabi ala Yidden, to be removed and on a higher level from all Yidden, bizman von Aseres Yemei Tshuva. This is in the time period, in the week before Yom Kippur, and Aseres Yemei Tshuva was ki yidua darf man in die Tag sein b'miyuchad oisgehit from ma'ore sein hepech haschos v'chula. It's a time when one has to be very careful not to speak anything that's the opposite of a merit regarding Yidden. So therefore, the question is, why establish a name for a chamber in the Beis HaMikdash reminding something negative about the behavior of the Kohanim Gedolim? So Muslims sagen, therefore we must say, as in dem Inyan from Parhedrin, Machlifen Neisam Kol Shnei Masachedish, then in this name, which means that they would change the Kohen Gadol once every 12 months, is Oich Farana Pirish Ikri Lemal Yusa in Tzada Kedusha. There is an explanation, and the main explanation of what this idea of Parhedrin means, that's positive, that's all within Kedusha, in holiness. Ava Pi as in Pashutin Zin, Benegeh Kama V'Kama Kohanim Gedolim, is this Taka an Inyan Bilti Rotzi, Heit B'Charichis Yomim, even if in a simple sense, and as it was regarding certain Kohanim Gedolim, it was something negative, the opposite of long life. Aber es ist voran der Inyan von Parhedrin, wie das ist bei die Kohanim Gedolim Ksherim v'Tzadikim Sherichu Yomim Amayla Gedola. But the meaning of the word Parhedrin primarily is in its source for the Kohanim Gedolim that were Tzadikim, that lived a long life, and the word Parhedrin expresses a very great level, as will be explained. So we can explain this as follows. The Nekudah von Avedas HaKohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim is Avedas HaTshuva. What is the point of the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol on this day of Yom Kippur? It's the day of Tshuva. Eine von den Meiles in Avedas HaTshuva legabe Avedas HaTzadikim is one of the advantages in connecting and serving Hashem with Tshuva, even more than one that is a tzaddik. But Avedas HaTshuva is b'derech hischatshus. With Tshuva, you're creating a connection to Hashem, which is a novelty, a completely new creation of a connection to Hashem. And that's because tzaddikim tzaddikim go from level to level and are constantly serving Hashem. As it says in the pasuk, and the Gemara says that tzaddikim never rest and they're constantly growing in their avodas Hashem. Aber das ist yechu mechayel. They are always on a level in kedusha connected. And then, with the power of the level that they're on, they build on that and then go to the next level, even if it's an infinitely greater level, but then they add another level to the level that they were on before. But it's never something that you could say that it's a novelty, that there's something new that they're creating in their connection to Hashem. On the other hand, when it comes to one that does tshuva, what's the power of tshuva? As mevet ametzias chadosha, that one becomes like a new creation. Biz as durch tshuva can a yid sagen of sich. What tshuva accomplishes is that a yid that does tshuva could say about himself, b'lashon Rambam, to use the expression of the Rambam, Eini oisai ha'ish she'asa oisan ha'maisam. I am not the same person that did those actions before. When a person becomes a Baal Tshuva, he takes on a new life. He feels completely differently, a brand new level of connection, and he's like a complete new person, a novelty, the hischatshus of the Aveda of Tshuva. Und die Shleimos von dem Inyan wird aufgetan in der Avedas HaKohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim b'Kodesh HaKadoshim. So this level of Aveda of Tshuva, and to its complete level, on the highest level of Tshuva, this is what's accomplished by the Kohen Gadol's Aveda on Yom Kippur in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Und der Fall bekommt jeder Yidem Koyach zu Ibegehen, min HaKotze LaKotze. From where do we get the power to make such an extreme change? From being in a place of a Rasha, and then to be a complete new person. A Baal Tshuva, bis zu Ibemachen sich, in Ametzias Chadosha Legamri. From here we take the power to change oneself completely, to become a complete new existence, a complete new creation. Das ist like the bir pnimi in them. This is also the deeper explanation for the halacha in them din, that is, in the halacha that it says, as the big day lavan she'ovi kohen gadol behem b'yom hatzayim, that the white garments that the kohen wore and was doing his aved in the Beis HaMikdash on Yom Kippur on this day, ein oive ben pam shniya lo'olam, he doesn't use them ever again. Ela nignozim b'mokim sheyivshet oisam sham shenema v'nichim sham. It's buried and it's hidden in that place where he undressed himself, and the pasuk says, "V'nicham sham," it remains there and it's never worn again. So seemingly, what's the reason for this? Why not use the same white garments the following year? Kishar kol bigdei kohen gadol, like we find with all other garments of the kohen gadol. Unvelachis is nidag ken akbala b'zman hashimush b'hem. We know you don't find any limitation regarding how long a kohen gadol may wear the same garments to serve in the Beis Hamikdash with them. Ulahoy, and take note of the following: as begodim velachazenen lechavid uletefares zenen meirich yomim mervi stam begodim. Garments that are created and are prepared to be used to be for the glory and the beauty of the kohen gadol are made on much better quality that will last longer than any plain garments. So definitely the garments that the kohen gadol wore on Yom Kippur were able to last another year. So why didn't they use it again the following year? Now the asbara bezeh is kanal. So the answer and the explanation is based on what we explained before. Was the kohen gadol gate rein in kodesh hakedoshim? Every year when the kohen gadol enters in the kodesh hakedoshim, verter al yideh v'dasei ametzias chadasha legamri. The kohen gadol becomes like a complete new entity. Afila legabi zay metzias b'kodesh hakedoshim farayarim. Even comparing to what his level of entrance into the Kodesh HaKadoshim was the year before. It's because he's not only elevated to a higher level, a new year, a new level, by the Kohen Gadol, doing this Aveda of Yom Kippur, representing the Din of Tshuva, he became elevated to be transformed to a complete new entity. Similar to the way it is by a Baal Tshuva. So not only was he elevated Michael or Choyel to a new level that was still based on who he was before, but by the Kohen Gadol, every year when he came and entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he was completely new. So his garments as well have to represent this, that it should be complete new garments and not the same garments as the year before. Especially as these garments are here to elevate the Kohen himself, that it should bring him honor and the beauty. In addition to this, that the Kohen Gadol himself now in this new year is on a completely new level. So the garments now have to then add to this in this time period. So they definitely have to be brand new garments. So based on this, we can understand, this is the content of the meaning of Parhedrin, that's something that changes every year in the positive sense. In Gashmias, physically, the Kohen Gadol lived a long life. But spiritually in their life, they were like new once in 12 months. When the Kohen Gadol entered a new year into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he was like a new entity. Das ist nicht derselbe Kohen Gadol, was es rein Farayarin in Kodesh HaKadoshim. It's not the same Kohen Gadol that entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim the year before. And therefore the name Lishkas Parhedrin, expressing this unique power of the Kohen Gadol to get elevated every year to become a complete new entity. That is, it's like a change, like a new Kohen Gadol that didn't exist the year before. Then Beer is verstandig. According to this explanation, it's understood as der Teuchen Inyan from Parhedrin, wie das ist Lamal Yusa, is da in alles Mannen. That the content of this concept of Parhedrin, as it is positively, is in all times. Euch bebayis rishon und betchilas bayis sheni, wenn es eine gewähn koinim, gedelim, gsherim, und tzadikim, shericha yamim. Including in the beginning of the time of the second Beis Hamikdash, when the koinim, gedelim that served were tzadikim and lived long life. So even if the actual title of the chamber at that time was not Parhedrin, but the content of Parhedrin, as explained, that this tremendous maila, that the Kohen Gadol becomes completely new every year, that was at that time as well. Damit wird man verstehen, was Rabbeinu HaKodesh hat in Mishnah reingestellt, beide nehmen. With this we can understand why Rabbeinu HaKodesh, which set up all the Mishnayos, so he put both titles for this chamber into Sai Lishkas Ha'etz. The title of this chamber called Lishkas Ha'etz, the wooden chamber, and Sai Lishkas Parhedrin, and being with the name of Parhedrin, are mentioned in Mishnayos. Why are both mentioned? Weil die zwei Namen sind Mirames of die zwei in Yonei Aveda, was darf man sein beim Kohen Gadol. Because both of these titles of this chamber tells us about two things necessary to be in the Aveda of the Kohen Gadol. One is Eitz, Bechinas Chesed, was das ist der Inyan von Avedas HaTzadikim. That on one hand, the Kohen Gadol represents Chesed, and it represents a constant connection that flows like Chesed, which is the Avodah of a Tzaddik. And on the other hand, Parhedrin was his merames of Avodah Tshuva canal. But at the same time, though, the Kohen Gadol also had the Maila of a Baal Tshuva when he entered in the Kodesh HaKadoshim on Yom Kippur once a year, that he got elevated to be on a complete new level like a Baal Tshuva. And that's the Maila of Parhedrin. And we could add and say about this, as das ist euch Masse mit dem Bier von Taten in dem Wort Parhedrin. This is fitting with what the Rebbe's father explains regarding the actual word Parhedrin, as it says Reimes of Dinim, that it hints to judgment. Von Parhedrin is zurechtgestellt von drei Werte. The word Parhedrin is a combination of three words, Par, Har, and Din. Was jeder von sie deutet on auf Din. As the Rebbe's father explains in detail how each one of these three words, Par, a cow, Har, a mountain, and Din, judgment, are all expressing this concept of Gvuris and Dinim, and that this word Parhedrin represents. So this is connected to the point mentioned that Parhedrin is connected to Tshuva. Weil die Avodah von Tshuva is verbunden mit Dinim und Gvuris. Because a Baal Tshuva is connected to Dinim and Gvuris, to this side, to this category of harshness and judgment. Der Baal Tshuva darf sich machen gedorim, usyagim shlo yachzir l'surei. And Avodah shel Gvura din, as it says in the Rambam, or rather here the Rebbe is quoting from what it says in Likutei Torah regarding a Baal Tshuva, that he has to create certain extra fences and different precautions that he should not fall back to his old ways. So meaning a Baal Tshuva always has to remain on guard, which represents this Avodah of Dinim, of creating guards for himself. Ubechlal is die Tnuah von Tshuva in the Beginning von Smoil Deiche. Generally, the Baal Tshuva is in that category of Smoil Deiche. Is sich mashpel mitzad sein Richuk ba'ava von Elikos. He looks at himself and realizes how low he was because of his past, how far he was from godliness. Und zu lieb dem Meitzah von der Alamis Vestedim was kommen von seiner Chatoim v'chulu. And it's as a result of that narrow and distressed place that he was in, when he was far from the Eibishter, because of the Avedas that he did, that brings him to do Tshuva. And therefore the Aveda of a Baal Tshuva is connected to the left side, to Dinim. Therefore the point about Parhedrin representing the Baal Tshuva is connected to Dinim, as the Rebbe's father explains it. Now, another point that will be very well explained according to what was said before about the two titles of this chamber, that we find an interesting thing, that Rabbeinu HaKadosh, when he gives the title to this chamber, so the titles in Mishnayos are as follows. Lishkas Ha'etz in Masechta Midas. In Masechta Midas it's referred to as the wooden chamber. Und der Shem Lishkas Parhedrin hat gestellt in Masechta Yuma. But in Masechta Yuma, there's a different name for it. Parhedrin. Why specifically these two Masechtas and the name in each one of them? So based on what was explained, we can say the Chiluk zwischen die zwei Masechtas is wie der Unterschied zwischen Avodas HaTzadikim and Avodas HaTshuva. The theme of these two Masechtas is similar to the two categories of tzaddikim that are serving Hashem, and one that serves through tshuva. The Teichel von Masechta Midas hat Shaychus zu Avodas HaTzadikim. Masechta Midas is a Masechta that's connected to one that serves as a tzaddik. Vidatate is mevayer, as the Rebbe's father explained, as b'Masechta Midas Mairi Eich Nivne Habayis Hasheni B'Tchila. This is the Masechta that explains how the second Beis HaMikdash was built from the beginning. Ubetchilas Bayis Sheni Harehayu Kainim Tzadikim. And at that time period, when they built the second Beis HaMikdash, the Kainim Gedalim that served them were Tzadikim. And therefore Masechta Midas is referring to the Avodah of Tzadikim, and it's here where the Masechta refers to this chamber of the Kainim Gedalim with the name Lishkas Ha'etz, as explained, representing their Avodah of Tzadikim with Chesed, and therefore they live long life. Now, the Rebbe adds another point to this, that since the following is a simple point, so the Rebbe's father didn't spell it out and didn't highlight this, that there's another few points here. Asher Aleph, number one, the Vart Midas is Meloshim Midah. The name of the Masechta, Midas, means that this is the size and of the specific measurements of the construction of the Beis HaMikdash, and V'zeo Teichen HaMasechta, that's what the content of the Masechta is all about. Was das Weis of Avodas HaTzadikim, was es mit HaSeder v'Hadroge, Medide v'Agbala. And therefore this represents the Avodah of Tzadikim, that what's unique about the nature of the Avodah of Tzaddikim is that as great as their Avodah is, that they go from level to level, but it's all organized from level to level with a certain limitation. Based on another point, Chazal Zogim, Man Tana Midas, who is the Tana of Masechta Midas? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. So Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, as Mishnasai, as the Gemara says about him, is Ka v'Noki, that his halachas that he taught were not that many, but whatever he taught was very pure. But das is bedugmas avodas tzadikim, and therefore this also represents the avodah of tzadikim. But avidasam is in inyani oyer. Their avodah is in a place of light and purity, without any darkness involved. And therefore, Masechta Midas represents the avodah of tzadikim. Masechta Yuma is toichna avodas Yom Kippurim. Masechta Yuma, which tells us everything that was done in Yom Kippur, which is avodas hatshuva, and that is the avodah of tshuva. Therefore, in this Masechta, Rabbeinu HaKadosh named this chamber with Lishkas Parhedrin, representing the avodah of tshuva. Pikol Anal, based on all of this, we'll also understand for was the eights from Lishkas Kayin Gadol hat gedacht sein, zugedeckt mit Sid. Why it was built with wood, but had to be covered with lime. While, so based on what we explained, it's understood that the oif tu von Avodas Kayin Gadol b'Yom Kippurim is nit that inyan von Avodas Tzadikim. What's the main accomplishment of the Avodah of the Kayin Gadol Yom Kippur is not the Avodah of Tzadikim, nor tshuva. Rather, his Avodah represents tshuva. But in them is mudgish nitter inyan von arichas yomim, and therefore over here what's being highlighted is not long life, representing chesed and tzaddik, nor in a gewisse Sinn, verkehrt, in a certain sense, the opposite, v'yezai avert ametzias chadasha. The fact that his life is completely renewed. And after 12 months, when he enters again into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, like a Baal Tshuva, he's a complete new person. And therefore the wood was covered. Now, Afal Pikein, but at the same time though, is der Nomen Parhedrin erst geworden la'achre, wie seine Gewinn, die Kohenim Gedolim was seine Gewinn, Shaloike dabei. The title of Parhedrin was only given in this time period when the Kohenim Gedolim were not behaving properly. Because as long as the Kohenim Gedolim were tzadikim, mitzadem was klalas adar, is given in adargim von tzadikim, and that was not only them, but it was the generation in general that was still on the level of tzadikim, is afal pi, as avodas Kohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim, is avodas hatshuva kanal. So although yes, even these Kohenim Gedolim that are tzadikim, but on Yom Kippur, their avodah represents tshuva, is this aber be'ikr the inyan from tshuva tzadikim. However, this is not the tshuva the way it is in its purity by one that is about tshuva, but this is a tshuva that applies even to a tzaddik. Ukidu is known as the inyan from tshuva is nit narif averis. Tshuva is not only for one that sinned, narif in richok von dem eibishten mitzad yeridas an neshama lamata beguf, but for the very fact that the neshama descends below and is far from its source. It's here in this world in a physical body. There is an inyan of tshuva to return and reconnect to that level. Und die Tnuah von tshuva is euch bei tzadikim. This level of tshuva applies even to one that's a tzaddik. That's the level of tshuva that was applicable in this time period when the Kohenim Gedolim and the generation in general was still tzaddikim. Mibatas bei tzaddikim is nicht da der Areis und der Antläufen von Eretz, Tzia, V'Tzalmavis. Yes, there is a concept of tshuva in their Aveda, but not to the full extent. Running away from a place of being in a territory which is a parched land and a place where a person is thirsty, and running away from the darkness to return to Hashem, that does not apply here when one is doing tshuva as a tzaddik. The Rebbe is zayet tzemaim in the tshuva from a tzaddik, so therefore their thirst in this level of tshuva that there is by a tzaddik, nit mitazah shturim. It's not with the full vigor. That expresses a deeper level of tshuva that is completely unlimited. On the high time is the Shem Halishka Dan Lishka Se'etz. And therefore, even though there was this Aved of tshuva for the Kohenim Gedolim on Yom Kippur, but the name of the chamber still remained the wooden chamber, the Lishka Se'etz, because this is not the tshuva in its purity, it's still primarily the Aved of tzadikim. Specifically in the time period when the Kohenim Gedolim were not behaving properly. And that is based on also the generation in general at that time that were not tzaddikim. is die Avodah Satshuva von the Kohanim Gedolim B'Yom Kippurim given oifton beim der Tshuva Kipshuta. So in this time period, the Avodah of the Kohen Gadol Yom Kippur was to bring Tshuva literally, the people that the Yidden should do Tshuva in the literal sense. Was die Tshuva dafke nemt reis a Yidden mikol mitidis vagbolis. When it's Tshuva literally, this is a Tshuva that takes a person out of all of his limitations, biz das machtem for a metzias chadosha legamri. And this is the level of Tshuva where one becomes a complete new creation, a complete new entity, and it's at that time that the Lishka was named Lishkas Parhedrin, representing this, being a metzias chadosha legamri.